Hello, everyone, and welcome to the next session of CME Palooza Fall. I am Scott Kober, one of the co-producers of CME Palooza, and I would like to welcome you to our next session, which is titled The 5-Year, 5-Month Plan. And this session is sponsored by Projects in Knowledge. Our moderator for the session is Steve Holstein. Steve is the Director of Education at the American Academy of Asthma, Allergy, and Immunology, typically known as Quad AI. So as with all of our sessions, prior to beginning, I would like to recognize all of the sponsors of CME Palooza Fall. Our gold sponsors, Daiichi Sankyo, Physicians Education Resource, Academic CME. Our silver sponsors, Peer Audience, Medscape Education, Clinical Care Options, Practicing Clinicians Exchange, Haymarket Medical Education, Helio CME, Projects in Knowledge, and Platform Q Health Education. And our bronze sponsors, PBI, Catalyst Medical Education, CMEology, the Academy for Continued Healthcare Learning, Vindigo Medical Education, Paradigm Medical Communications, Postgraduate Institute for Medicine, Global Education Group, CE Outcomes, Integrity Continuing Education, Answers in CME, RMEI, Access Medical Education, MedIQ, Integritas Communications, Infograph Ed, Free CME, Med Learning Group, Primary Care Network, Prova Education, Red Med Ed, Peer Voice, and CME Outfitters. We're going to have a speed reading competition at the end of the day to see how quickly people can get through all 33 of the CME Palooza Fall sponsors. So there are two ways to ask questions during this and all CME Palooza sessions. You can use the free CME text line to send in a question. The number is 267-6660-CME. That's 0263. Or you can tweet your question to us using the CME Palooza hashtag. So please submit questions during this session, and we will get to as many as we can. So we will be incorporating audience response technology using Poll Everywhere during this session. We have a couple questions right at the beginning of the session. So if you have downloaded the Poll Everywhere app, you can join the presentation entitled CME Palooza 000, or you can type in the following URL in your web browser, which is www.pollev.com/CMEPalooza 000. Finally, a brief disclosure slide. Please note that the opinions, discussions, and/or conclusions expressed are those of our panelists and do not represent an endorsement by or position of their employer, its parent company, or their affiliates. And so with that, I am going to turn this session over to our moderator, Steve Holstein, to introduce the rest of the panel.
All right, thanks, Scott. Good morning, everyone. Welcome aboard. We're going to take a couple of minutes here just to introduce ourselves so you know a little bit about all of us, and that'll give you time to get logged into the Poll Everywhere. As Scott mentioned, we're going to start off after you meet all of us. We've got a couple questions to find out about all of you, and then we'll dive in. And as Scott said, please do throw in your questions as we go along. We definitely want to hear from you and answer the questions you've got. To start, we'll go in alphabetical order by last name. So Pam Beaton, let's start with you. So Pam, why don't you tell us what organization you're with, a little bit about your program or your involvement in the CE world, and what's been the most positive thing you've experienced during the pandemic?
Sure, thanks, Steve. So my name is Pam Beaton. I'm the Associate Director of Grant Sponsorship and Investigator-Sponsored Studies at Vertex Pharmaceuticals. So I'm on the commercial supporter side. I've been in CE for a while, both on the provider and supporter side. The most positive thing during the pandemic is I bought my first house recently. So I've been in it for, it'll be 3 months tomorrow. So that's been the most exciting, positive thing during the pandemic.
Yeah, that one's going to be hard to top. But let's see if anyone can do better. We've also got Linda Caples with us. Linda, let's find out a little bit about you.
Sure. Good morning or afternoon, depending on where you are on the planet. And my name is Linda Caples. I am the Director of Continuing Professional Development at the Medical College of Wisconsin, which is a private freestanding health science university. have my doctorate in adult education and work in global health as well. And the most positive thing to happen during the pandemic, there was a couple of things, but my husband and I celebrated 20 years in takeout, of course, 20-year wedding anniversary via our favorite restaurant, but at home.
All right. Also, a very good. I think that's at least tied with First House.
Okay.
I think we all have to agree with that. We've also got joining us Ted Singer. Ted.
Hey, Steve. Thanks. I'm Ted Singer. I'm president of PVI, Peer Review Institute for Medical Education. We are on the MEC provider side of our marketplace. And, we develop both live, on demand, and of course, during COVID, virtually live education across a variety of therapeutic areas. I've been in CME for about 25 years, which is daunting to say. And I think the most positive thing that has happened during COVID is because everything's been sort of grounded and my kids' weekend activities have been curtailed, I have taken over more of the work around the house that I used to have to outsource. So I've been doing all my own yard work, trying to do more fix-it stuff. And as a result, besides the fulfillment that comes with that, I was saving some money. But my new teenage driver decided to fill our non-diesel car with diesel fuel last week, and that basically wiped out all of that savings. So I feel like I'm at a net neutral from a financial standpoint, but happy to have reinvigorated those handyman skills.
All right. Well, if that's your positive, we're not going to ask what the negative was.
Fair enough.
All right. And then just a little bit about me. As Scott mentioned, I'm the Director of Education at the American Academy of Allergy, Asthma, and Immunology. We're a medical specialty society. Like Ted's organization, we used to do a fair amount of live education. That's all gone virtual. We do a range of activity types. And my big accomplishment this summer was because all of my travel was canceled, because all of our live events were canceled, I was able to get some planned foot surgery and I didn't miss anything. So I had as good excuse as any to sit on my living room couch for a month in a cast and didn't feel like I was missing anything out there. So I definitely think Pam and Linda won the contest of best outcome from the pandemic. But we are here to talk about CME and how we're all adjusting to these new conditions in the world with our programs. As the title shows, we've gone from planning long-term, 5 months or so, or 5 years or so, to maybe looking out 5 months ahead. So to help us shape that discussion, we first want to find out about all of you out there watching. So we do have a couple of polling questions. Scott, if you could pull up the first one. So, and some of you have already responded. That's great. But yeah, first we'd just like to get a sense of what provider types are out there listening and watching today. So if anyone hasn't responded yet, wanted to throw in a final response. There goes a few. Let's see if it's like a horse race. Let's see if we can guess the winner. Okay, anyone else? Last call. Okay, so it looks like we've got a lot of folks from medical education companies, a pretty good contingency from hospitals and health systems, and then everyone else is pretty much tied, sort of making up the last quarter or so. But we do have a fair amount of diversity, so that's good. Great. Yeah, let's go to the second question. So we've identified 6 topics as we were talking about these issues. So we're curious from you, from the list of topics here on the screen, vote for the one that you feel you most want or need to learn more about. Transitioning from live to virtual, best online. All right. Somebody backed out of A. Somebody reneged their vote. Wow. All right. We'll do a last call. Any final votes? Okay, so let me just mark this down, because what we're going to do is we're going to go through these in order by most to least votes, so that we make sure we can cover the highest priority stuff first. So it looks like this whole issue of transitioning from live to virtual is probably, we've all been through it by now, so maybe we've heard enough about it, but interesting. We'll start out talking about best practices for online education. We'll talk about connecting with learners, and then educational strategy. And then we'll go down to program management and logistics, and then end with educational technology and transitioning from live to virtual. Great. So if we're going to start talking about online education, I think I'm going to throw this to you, Linda, to start, because thinking about you in your setting in an academic medical center, you've probably, in your program, do a lot of live on-site education, regularly scheduled series, those kinds of things. So what have you focused on in terms of migrating to more online offerings in serving your constituents?
Sure. And since we do have a lot of hospitals and health systems in our audience, I know a lot of you also are doing a lot of regularly scheduled series, tumor boards, case review conferences, M&Ms. And there's a couple of things, right? You have various HIPAA concerns, and making sure that if you do go to a virtual platform, that you're keeping your patient information safe and protected. And so that is a concern. I remember when we very first started going online, our learning management system is hosted on a third-party platform, and people were innocently posting their Zoom information, and I'm like, please don't do that, because you'll get Zoom bombed in the worst possible way. So we nipped that in the bud really quick, but that was a learning curve for some of our CME coordinators. But what we have done, and it's been a challenge, right? Because there's the collegiality, there's the networking, there's the camaraderie that happens when you're in person, and how do you recreate that sense of community in an online environment? And what we've noticed is that the chat feature, making sure that chat is on, even if it is a case review or a tumor board, has been really important in fostering those relationships and keeping them going. And they're hilarious too. If you actually read them, they're really funny. And it's just nice to see people being human and, expressing humor and all the memes and everything that they find, but also still taking care of patients. And so you still need to give people an outlet for being human and expressing joy. And it's been very interesting watching that chat. So much so that I'm trying to do an IRB and study chat of regularly scheduled series, because I think there's a lot of very interesting things that come out of that. But that chat also gives you really great educational needs assessment information as people are asking questions or posting questions and things that you can glean from those regularly scheduled series conversations that can lead to educational needs for future activities. So don't neglect your chats. And we've learned that, mainly through observation. It wasn't really intentional. The other thing that we are keeping in mind, again, is making sure that our systems are secure, like I mentioned before, because of HIPAA, also because we're a medical school, FERPA as well, for those of you who have students, because we do have a few medical schools on here. And then the other strategy is, even for how we do evaluations, and having the evaluation link posted in the chat, so that people for grand rounds, for example, are more likely to click and activate and actually answer the evaluation while they're there in the session, as opposed to sending out an email afterwards, where now people are busy in clinic, or they're helping their kid with their virtual learning and they're distracted. So making sure that even how we do evaluation is a little different. It's a little more more in the moment. We use texting codes for claiming credit. We've done that for years, but that's increased. Some people were reluctant to do that, but COVID encouraged them to not sign a physical sheet of paper. So, and yes, some of our regularly scheduled series did go on hold for a while as people were trying to figure out what type of technology made the most sense, whether it was Zoom or WebEx or some other platform. But yeah, so those are some of the top things when it comes to regularly scheduled series, monitoring the chats, making sure your information is secure, and giving people opportunity to complete an evaluation or assessment within the actual activity, and not just sending it out later.
Great, thanks. Ted, how does that compare to what you've been experiencing in your part of the world with as you've been moving to more online educational offerings yourself?
Yeah, well, I think what's interesting is that we've always done a lot of online education, and I think what's happened now is that everything is online, right? So online has become a massive channel with no competition, essentially. I mean, prior to this, when you were designing a program and sort of looking at the needs and seeing what was going to fit, you had a lot of different venues that you could possibly, where you could place education, right? So in the lot, and I think we have to really be descriptive when we talk about live now. So like saying live in person, sort of referring to the pre-COVID world when people would go to a physical location and be in the room with other people, and along with the teachers or the faculty that were there. So you had a lot of different ways to do live in-person education. I mean, for the facets that we would be involved with, you might have regularly scheduled series of the type that Linda was talking about, where we'd be partnering with a health system. You might have large satellite symposia that were adjacent to major medical meetings. You might have smaller standalone regional meetings. You might be part of a state chapter of a society having their annual or biannual meeting. And now all of that has become virtual, and by virtual, by definition, it's online. And so part of it is to figure out, what does that now mean? Are the modalities competing with each other, or how do you put a value proposition for a learner on something that's virtual live versus something that's on demand that they can access whenever they want? What kind of different features and functionality does that have to have? What sort of good value do you have to show to a learner to show up on time to experience something that's happening then, as opposed to them checking it out later? And these are challenges. I mean, even pre-COVID, I think a lot of educators who did live webcasts, were tackling these challenges. So one nice thing is that by having done those in the past, this wasn't a completely foreign area. But now that really all of your sort of your portfolio of different ways to teach someone has been reduced to a single all-encompassing channel, you have to really figure out, what are you offering that learner that's going to make them show up, especially in person? So that's been a real challenge. But at the same time, I think you've got a riveted audience. You've got basically people going to this channel for all of their needs for the most part. I mean, I'm sure there's still some, inter-colleague education that goes on with people texting and talking to each other and chatting each other. But for the most part, for the faculty-led student attending session, it's all happening online. So there's a lot of challenges in differentiation and building a value proposition in that, but it's a fun challenge.
Yeah. Well, I do want to come back to that in a second, but before I do, Pam, I'm curious to hear from the industry side, from the funder side. What are you seeing along these lines? Are you hearing from organizations that might have planned a live event and now are having to transition over to a virtual alternative? And how is that being handled? Or are there trends you're seeing in what people are planning for the next few months, rest of this year into early next year? Oh, Pam, I think you're muted.
Cool, thanks. Sorry, I'm trying to reduce any background noise. So my team handles international requests. So not only do I manage North America, US-based requests, but we also handle international requests. And sort of what's been interesting to see is how the different regions are handling how they're planning and developing and presenting education. I think I was writing a bunch of stuff down as Ted and Linda were talking. I think that in the first few months, as we know, there was sort of the what do we do now? How long is this going to be? When can we get back in person again? And now it's like, well, when let's just stick with virtual live for now, and then maybe live down the road. So I will say I'm still seeing some live components, which sort of terrifies me. Live in person components to activities, which absolutely terrifies me. But I think what I have seen in pieces, but wish I was seeing and hearing more of, is sort of this idea of rethinking engagement, both from an instructional design component when you're actually developing these activities, like taking a step back and not saying, well, this was live, we're going to take it to virtual, but actually rethinking what does that actually mean when we're here in front of a screen and you've got this sort of talking head and the lack of learner engagement. And I think that, like, to Ted's earlier point, how can you get that learner, and maybe this touches into a later thing, how can you get that learner to stay? I think that a lot of us sometimes, if we're participating in an event and it may not hold our attention, we walk around the house, we do our dishes, whatever, help with the kids' homework, so on and so forth. But how can you keep that learner engaged? And then also not with the content, but how can you keep the learners engaged with each other? Because I think that's probably what I've seen the most, is that lack of networking, which people are really, really missing out of. And that sort of the hallway learnings is how can you engage your learners in such a way so they still have that hallway learning, and then opportunity to interact with each other without being so prescriptive about it.
Okay, that's interesting, because now I'm going to real quickly ask my totally selfish question about this topic. And it gets at one of those things about what Pam was mentioning about instructional design and learner engagement with the education. Something we're looking at as we're planning to convert our 2021 annual meeting to an virtual hybrid, combination live and enduring event, is how do we best prepare the faculty to teach in a way that's going to keep learners engaged in this virtual world? So what are all of you seeing or thinking about or doing along those lines in terms of faculty preparation?
Well, sure, Steve, if I could hop in for a second. I will say we've done, I think all of us have done, or at least have Googled Zoom etiquette, right? As that's like step one, right? Is the whole, I have a very plain background right now, and all of those Zoom etiquette type things, and when to mute, when not to mute, and all the basic, how to make eye contact and checking, and we've done that even for CME Palooza, checking in with Scott ahead of time, making sure that you are testing the tool that you're using to make sure that you can connect and you understand how the features work. We have an instructional design team as a medical school, of course, and who are, just kind of like Ted and some of his team, because we work with Ted. Hi, Ted. just again on seeing what's out there and what's available. And as many of us know now, because we're following it, how Zoom and WebEx and Google are rolling out new aspects of their products to be more interactive, to allow for group breakout sessions and enhance their chat features. And like my daughter's Zoom for School has emojis that they can use as their rating scales for things. So part of the challenge is, having a group of instructional designers that understand the technology and what it can do, but then having those mini workshops for faculty that are fun, that are engaging. Even my daughter's school, she's a middle schooler, the instructional design director did a workshop for parents just to teach us how to use the technology so that we could support our own children. And that's kind of the same, in the same vein for faculty to just do 15-minute, shots of, here's how to engage when you're teaching this type of content. But that's the other thing to keep in mind is what's the content, right? We do a point of care ultrasound class. That's simulation, that's hands-on. That does not translate virtually the same way as a lecture does. And again, working with those instructional design experts in seeing what is appropriate and what isn't to translate into an online environment, or what other tools do we need to make simulation? Because you can absolutely do simulation online. You're just going to need different tools to do it. And then do you have a Scott who's, waiting in the wings, who has the knowledge to be that backup support? So then that's the other thing that we're thinking about is, what does the faculty person need to know? And then what does the moderator / tech support person who's online with you need to know? Do you need a tech support person online in real time with you during a session, who's going to be managing your poll everywhere, who's going to be managing your simulation tools, so your faculty doesn't have to do those things? And so kind of what is that division of labor, right? And then when you're putting your grant together for PAM, you need to be clear about what that division of labor is, and who's going to be really managing the online simulation, managing the online chats, so that things run smoothly and don't create hiccups and issues for your learner engagement. So that's a lot of what we're spending our time on right now, is saying, yes, we can do this conference, but we need 2 or 3 people we need 2 or 3 Scots in order to make this successful, so that they can fulfill their role and then the faculty can fulfill theirs.
Great. I see Scott has popped up on screen, which means we've got a question. So Scott, what questions are coming in?
So first of all, Linda, I don't think anybody needs any Scots in their life. But yes, there are a couple of questions that came in over the free CME text line. So here's the first question. How much, if at all, are you pre-recording faculty for your virtual live events? And what are the pros and cons of doing so?
Ted, do you want to
Sure. I'm happy to answer. Well, I think, as someone who's producing a medical education activity, you're always wanting to control as many variables as you possibly can. But at the same time, there's trade-offs for what can happen live, right? So you don't want it to come off canned. And so I think I was to follow up, if the question hadn't come in, I was going to follow up on what Linda was saying about technical walkthroughs being really important. And it's a luxury if you can afford it, right? I know everybody's got different staffing levels and things like that. But when Linda said we should all have a Scott in our lives, I think every faculty should have a Scott in their life, right? So you want to be able to get the faculty on for a technical walkthrough before the event to make sure that all of the things that make for a very effective technological transmission are in place. Does the microphone work? Is it well lit? Is the eye line proper? All of these things, are they comfortable with the sort of webcast interface that you're going to be using? And so, testing their internet speed, asking them questions about whether or not that they ever have latency issues. And so I think what's happened with us is we have occasionally captured ahead of time if we think that there's going to be a problem with technology or a problem with transmission. Certainly you're not going to want to do a live webcast in the midst of a weather event that's going on in the region where the faculty is or that's impacting a bunch of the country. So these are all things you have to take into account. Although I think, having them live in person synchronous is always preferable because they can sort of answer questions and have a little bit more dynamic interaction. And also, you're not in any danger of something they're saying being outdated. I mean, granted, you're not going to want, if you were going to tape anything, it wouldn't be months ahead of time, but you want it to be as timely as possible. So I think that's, to me, it's mostly about the technical setup ahead of time so that something that's happening live in person goes off flawlessly, while accepting that there's always going to be a weird curveball that you have to deal with.
Yeah, I'll just add, I know one sort of trend, I guess, I've seen and that we're actually going to be doing for a smaller program is pre-recording some of the sort of planned presentations, but then having the faculty online to do live question and answer with the audience. So that way, as Ted was talking about, you don't have to worry about technical glitches getting in the way of the content getting through, but then you can still allow for some of that learner engagement like we were talking about before.
Okay, there's one more question that I came. You guys kind of caught me in mid-sip from my lovely platform queue water bottle. So what is your preferred online platform these days? Zoom, WebEx, something else?
None of the above. No, no. I think we all. I think part of it also depends on what you're trying to do, what the content is, who the audience is. Many of us on this call, this might be the first time you've ever used StreamYard, literally on this call, but there are days when I was on a Microsoft Teams call right before this, and right after this session, I'll be on a Zoom call, and we just kind of become fluid with what platforms we use and what makes the most sense. And Pam, I'd be interested in hearing from you, but I as I mentioned in my intro, I do global health work, and that's a lot of WhatsApp and Instagram, actually. Janaeans love Instagram for some reason. So those are the tools the online tools that we use, because that's where they are. And when you're dealing with parts of the world that are mobile phone heavy, more so than laptop or desktop heavy, then, Zoom tends to be their, platform of preference. However, again, a lot of what I'm doing with teams in West Africa is on WhatsApp, because that's just what they use. So I think there's, some cultural variability depending on where you are on the planet and what your bandwidth and other technological realities are. But locally, I think people are in the United States anyway. I think people are just getting very used to hopping around from platform to platform.
Ted, what about you?
Yeah, so first I wanted to mention a great partner, Educational Measures, who I know works with a lot of different companies in our space. They have an excellent proprietary platform called Array, which I think a lot of people have used in both the live in-person setting and the virtual setting. So they're a tremendous partner, a great company in our space. So it's, hopefully everyone's applauding when they hear the name of Educational Measures. Otherwise, when we're talking about sort of more ubiquitously available platforms, Zoom has been great. And so, we've used that quite a bit as well.
Okay. Pam, I'm curious, is this something when groups are coming to you and seeking funding, is this something that makes a difference? Is this something you care about? Do you want to know what platform or platforms they're using? Or is that not an essential fact for your purposes?
I mean, you know, to Linda's point, we're sort of bouncing around. Like, you know, I personally am now a fan of Zoom only because my Zoom background game is super strong. But it depends. It really depends. If it doesn't have to be, you don't need the Tesla model, not to use any brand name cars. Sorry if anybody has any. I don't need the, you know, because one thing as a supporter is if you ask for the Tesla, I'm going to have to pay for the Tesla. So if you're asking for the Tesla and you're not using that technology to its full advantage, then I'm going to notice that. But if you're like, I just want to do online education, our budget's really small, all we have is Zoom, but we're going to do X, Y, and Z to make sure that those learners stay engaged, then I'm fine with that. Like for me, I'm more concerned about how you are working with your faculty. I know we touched on faculty a little early. How are you working with your faculty for learner engagement versus the bells and whistles of the technology that you're using? And I will say there was a couple things that I wrote down when you guys were discussing faculty. Is first of all, I do not miss working with faculty at all. I don't miss that. I don't miss that at all. But I think you know what I heard everybody talk about was sort of the technology and the Zoom etiquette and all those things, which are also super important. But also sort of some of the things that I know that I used to frustrate me when I was on the provider side is, you know, 50 slides for a 15-minute presentation. Those individuals who just talk and don't necessarily pause. I'm one of those people who is guilty of talking too fast. But you know, I'd be curious if people are managing their faculty a little differently now than just, hey, you need to get your disclosures in on this date, you need to get your slides in on this date, okay, call it a day. Are people providing different guidance for their faculty? Are they backing up when things are due a little more? I mean, we all know faculty will still wait till that last day, but are they trying to back it up? Like, those are the things for me, while it wouldn't come through in a proposal, I'm more concerned about how that education is delivered over how you can explain it to me in a proposal. Because you can put as many words on a page as you want, but if it's not successful, and I think we're probably in the stage where, you know, if you have the evaluations for satisfaction for faculty, you know, it usually sort of hovers in the 4.4 to 4.6 range on a scale of 1 to 5. Is, you know, does that still stay there, or is there an opportunity to like work with faculty to improve that, again, that instructional design?
You know, those are great points. Yeah, Ted.
Yeah, so just to answer that a little bit, I think first thing with faculty, they're loving this virtual world. You know, they don't have to leave home, and they're sort of, you know, we're coming to them. You know, they're doing all of this stuff from their office or their living room. So I think in a lot of ways it's going to be, although I'm sure there's going to be a lot of pent up demand for everyone to get back out and see people and go to conferences. I think they're going to be like, can't we just record this from home when we want them to show up in person from now on? So that's been an interesting development. I think a lot of them have enjoyed this once they've gotten over sort of the getting used to the technology and the setup. But I will say that especially in a smaller group learning situation, you know, we've seen, you know, you have a faculty who shows up, their camera's on, and you might have, you know, say 20 or 30 attendees. It's sort of a, you know, a virtual grand rounds type situation with no one with their cameras on, you know, just names up there. And I think that can be kind of daunting for a faculty member, but we've seen some of them getting better and better at drawing those people out, you know. So they've done those learners, you know, they've done their little bit of lecture, and then maybe they've got a question that they want to throw out, and they'll call on somebody and say, you know, okay, let's talk about a case you've dealt with, you know, and there might be silence. They're like, come on, I'm not going to quit until you say something. And pulling that first response out of that first learner then typically leads to the dam being broken and more people and learners engaging. And so we've seen some faculty get much better at that. And I think we see that in person from the stage as well. Some who are more cognizant of, are just better teachers, better engagers. But in the virtual space, I'm seeing that more and more because I think that they're getting more comfortable in a Zoom teacher experience.
Well, we've kind of naturally migrated over into this whole issue of learners and learner engagement. So are you seeing different audiences for the education you're offering? I mentioned, we do our annual meeting late February, early March. And so, typically we have about 5,000 professional attendees, learners who come to that. And in talking to folks at other societies, I'm hearing some groups that are doubling and tripling their normal attendance because, just what you were saying, Ted, just like the faculty don't have to travel, the learners don't have to travel. And so their numbers are just skyrocketing. They're getting huge international turnout. Are you seeing any differences in who's attending and who's participating in the activities you're planning? Linda, you're shaking your head.
Yes, I mean, even for, hospitals and health systems, if you think about it, a lot of hospitals, health systems may be statewide, they may be regional. And so you can get a grand rounds or, even a case review conference beyond your own actual, quote unquote, four walls because you're now in a virtual space. So like, for example, we have a child advocacy, and it's always bothers me that child advocacy is actually a subspecialty. But they do a lot of amazing work and have been very active across our state. But you look at their attendance for their series, and there's people from Texas, there's people from Virginia, all over the country that are now involved in that regularly scheduled series because we have one of the largest child advocacy specialist departments in the country. And so we're able to now pull people who we wouldn't normally be able to if we were just staying within, the brick and mortar of, in this case, the Children's Hospital. So absolutely. I think for a regularly scheduled series, there is a real opportunity to expand that collaboration. And what we have done throughout the years when it comes to learner engagement, and it's enhanced in a virtual environment, kind of what Ted was talking about, where you have the faculty who's like, I know there's somebody out there with a case. Well, you kind of like plant your Confederates, right? You see who's registered or who's planning to come and say, hey, Ted, I know you're going to be, at our next case review. Can you bring that case we were talking about the other day? And then and then as far as the audience is concerned, Ted is just a willing participant, right? But it just kind of, again, helps kind of plant a few learner seeds to get the conversation going in a little more natural and quicker, right? Because Ted knows he's up, right? And we've seen some of that, and that's worked really pretty well. We've also seen a great expanse in our pediatric urgent. Peds is on top of everything. But in pediatric urgent care, again, their little monthly within the four walls has expanded across the country. And again, for educational needs assessment, for evaluation and assessment, for looking at what are true needs. It also calls into question who your learners are, right? Because as accredited providers, we describe who our learners are. And in a virtual context, even if you're a state accredited provider, that definition may change because you're now in a virtual space. Steve was just talking about a large number of international participants that weren't part of the original plan and probably would not have participated if it's 100% live or mostly live, right? And so how Quad AI is going to define their learner is going to change or potentially change because virtual allows for that that expansion.
Okay, so
This is
Pam,
Steve, I just wanted to say, Linda, if you ever want me as a plant in your learner cohort, I'm willing to work with you on that to get some conversation going.
Yeah.
But the second piece of that is just, I think what we've seen is that, again, because you went from all these possible ways to get education to one way, I think a lot of people flooded online looking for education. Besides that, because of COVID, there was a big pent up demand for education, right? And so I think we have seen more people out there looking for online education, which was already a massive channel anyway. I think when getting into the theme of this presentation, when we think about a 5-month plan, we definitely are questioning, like, how much will that continue? Whether it's people are able to get, but hopefully, one day we all will be able to get back out to doing live in-person education. When will that be? And when that happens, how much will the online channel sort of settle back down, or will it stay at a new level? That's an interesting question that we ponder.
Yeah. So, Pam, given that, some of this is kind of in flux, and, they're, like Linda was saying, sometimes you've got people appearing that you didn't plan for. When say, if we're reporting outcomes and things to a supporter, how do you look on that if what we report, if like the actual attendance is way different from what we originally predicted? What does that tell you?
So 5 months ago, I would have probably said, I get it. But when we talk about the 5-month plan, because the key is planning, and I don't really want to sound like a broken record, but I think that now's this opportunity that I think probably everybody's experienced, when particularly those, Steve, medical specialty societies, where a lot of times just the allied health professionals couldn't go to the meetings because they didn't have the budget, or they didn't feel it was relevant to them, right? So, this model of plan and present it for physicians, and then sort of everybody else, maybe they can come, but it's really plan and present it for physicians, not really as a interprofessional or multidisciplinary education. So for me, what I would want to know is, how are you going to take that information and use it in the future? So if I still continue to see requests that are like physician, 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 and then sort of everybody else, I'm not going to see any sort of change in that sort of evolution of how you've taken your previous outcomes and used it to plan future educational interventions. Because now is really that opportunity to plan. And I get it in the future or in the past with live education, when people couldn't travel and folks didn't have the budget, it was really, really hard to plan for those people who couldn't necessarily attend. But now that they can attend, how are you planning for the healthcare team, and including the patient? Like, how can you also include the patient? Maybe they may not be learners, but they could potentially participate as faculty. So again, if I'm personally not a numbers person, a participant person, I'm more of a learner person. So if more people show up, did they learn something new? So, we talk about levels of outcomes all the time. Did the people who you wouldn't have thought had attended before, are they changing their knowledge? Or was this just sort of like, I needed credit right this second for something, and so that's why I did it? So what are you doing with that information before it gets to me?
Thank you, because that is I think a good transition, because I'm just being mindful of the time. We're coming up on about our last 10 minutes, and we've only gotten really through 2 of our 6 topics. But the third one was about strategy, and how do we strategize now in this sort of unknown future? And Pam, you actually, I think, alluded to this early on in the session, where you talked about groups that seem to be planning live events for, coming up in the next few months. Are they the outliers, or are you seeing people planning activities and then coming back and needing to modify them? Or are you seeing, is there a drop in proposals because people are afraid to plan out that far ahead? What are you seeing on that front?
I think there's a drop in proposals. I think that as restrictions were lifted in Europe, people are like, okay, cool, let's get everybody back together. And now that restrictions are getting locked back down again, it's like, oops, well, maybe that's not the best thing. So I'm seeing sort of the shifts there. In North America, I think we're sort of understanding the fact that we can't get people together. I think my other challenges is when there's the request to get people together, even the faculty together, because particularly depending on certain specialty types, I don't know if it's really good for them to travel, even to a studio, to do things based on their patient population. I know that if I was a vulnerable patient and I heard that my physician was traveling, I wouldn't want to go see them, right? And I know that there's telehealth and telemedicine. So I think I think that I don't want to say be resigned to the fact, but understanding that we have the opportunity to do things differently now and sort of move that live model to the side. I wish everybody was thinking that way, but not everybody does.
Yeah. Well, Ted, how far out are you and your group planning at this point?
Well, it's interesting. So looking at the poll at the beginning, where the people watching this session, a large percent were medical education companies like me, and I think that one way to describe the commercially supported CME atmosphere or CE atmosphere, which is what a lot of medical education companies are engaged in. It's really been, while COVID is the ultimate tumultuous situation, over the last 15 years, 20 years, it's really been a very unpredictable marketplace. Starting in 2004 when you had the OIG guidance, which transformed, which created grant offices within commercial supporters. Many companies had to reorganize themselves into standalone, provider focused companies only. And over that 15 years, there was a lot of unpredictability in the space. Was commercially funded CME going to go away? Was it going to be severely restricted? Commercial support budgets rose and fall on that. Companies reorganized themselves. And so I think that any medical education company that's left in 2020 has shown a strength of adaptability. You have to be adaptable to your environment. And so in a lot of ways, I think that a lot of us are built to be adaptable to these situations. And that's just to sort of comment on the culture, I think, that permeates a lot of the stakeholders in this space. You're used to, you look ahead, but you can't look too far ahead. You can't invest in what you think is going to happen in a year or 2 years because something might change. So in a lot of ways, I think you wind up sort of oftentimes being staffed below the level of work that you have, so that you're not overstaffed. And then hopefully you can if you're growing, you can grow behind that. And so I just say all that to say, I think that's the mentality we've always had, to try to make sure we've got adequate staff to handle the amount of work that we're currently doing. And then, if we sense there's some growth, planning around that. And that's just sort of from a how we structure ourselves perspective. As far as trying to read the tea leaves on what's going to happen, I think we just, again, if you have an adaptably built organization, you're able to roll with the punches. So a lot of programs that we work with are in collaboration with a society who might be planning their annual meeting. Well, some societies are saying, we're still going to try to do in person next year. I know Pam was saying that, she wishes people would go away from that. And I think public health will drive that, but 9 months out, they might still be saying that. And so we have to sort of plan that might be the case. But if it goes virtual, we have to be able to adapt to that. And so I just think you have to be organized for adaptability, basically.
Okay. Scott, we must have some more questions.
So there's one more question, and then
Okay.
we're right at the end of time. But I'm going to give this one last question. So this kind of goes back to technology questions. So for your faculty, what have you done to either add or boost their internet speed, and are you sending them equipment so that their camera feed and their lighting is a little bit better than it may otherwise be?
Interesting. Is anyone taking that on?
Sure. Well, it depends on how you define faculty, right? Because as an institution, as a medical school, our faculty who are our employees, and I'm an employee as well, right? So there's like the laptop I'm literally talking to you on right now was a company issued laptop. So for people who are employees of MCW, there's packets that IS has put together to help with some of those things. However, if you're an invited faculty from another institution, or like we work with Ted or Ted's company on our TCT annual meeting, we're not for that. That's a huge meeting, right? We're not going to be providing that level of technology. And then I would be curious in terms of Pam and budget and infrastructure, because if you are, buying microphones for people, which can cost a lot of money over time, and it's not like they're going to ship it back. Faculty, we're not going to ship it back in a timely fashion, right? So it's not like a checkout system is going to be wholly effective for some of these things. But anyway, as employed faculty of the institution, there is technological support that our organization does provide with microphones, headphones, boosters, things like that. But for invited speakers, we aren't doing that.
Ted, are you doing any of that?
Yeah, we send, we sort of like Linda said, we send equipment out to a number of faculty, and we hope they send it back.
And what's been your success rate?
No, good. They send it back. But I do think that one thing that you have to keep in mind is that especially sort of nationally renowned faculty, they often are very dependent on their assistants to keep their schedule organized, keep their life organized. And in a lot of cases, they are separated from those people physically. And that means that they have to do a lot of these things themselves, including, pack up the FedEx box and send it out. And that's something you really have to hope happens quickly, but often doesn't.
That is a great point. Just real quickly, Pam, are you seeing people requesting funding to purchase and distribute this kind of equipment?
Not so much in the med ed space and other spaces, a little more. Because we can't buy a new iPhone for anybody, right? Like we can't buy a new iPhone. That being said, we understand that there might be certain technological advances that faculty or educational activity may need to enhance that educational activity. So what is our portion of that? So I sort of liken back, I know that Linda was talking about hands-on education is back in the day when we used to have to come up with whatever that rental amount for that in-kind support was. What is that rental amount for that piece of equipment for me? Because I'm not going to buy 20 faculty brand new laptops, iPhones, iPads, anything like that. But if there are technical advances, I'll certainly consider supporting that. But you have to make it so I'm not paying for the whole thing. Like what is it enduring over time? Because I'm also thinking of what are you asking every single other company for all the other activities that you're requesting funding for?
All right, Scott, are there any other questions?
No, and we are right up against time. So just very quick for people who are watching this session, there is a survey link at the bottom of the live tab that we hope that everyone will click on and complete to give us a sense of who's watching CME Palooza Fall and to help us plan for the future. And for those people who are watching this live and want to view the next session that should be starting momentarily, on our live page, just click on the appropriate session link and that session will start momentarily. And so with that, I would like to thank Steve and Ted and Linda and Pam, who we've provided laptops and iPhones to, paid in full. Don't have to return them, of course.
We should have waited for the 12 to come out, Scott.
So thank you to the four of you, and thank you for everybody who's watching, and we will see everyone soon.
Thank you.